Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and so happy to be with you. Joined, of course, by my co-host Chad Oban, and also joining us is Kirsten Baesler. Now, you probably know who Kirsten Baesler is. She's been North Dakota Superintendent since the 2012 cycle. She's completing her third term in office and is seeking a fourth. But when she sought the endorsement of the North Dakota Republican Party's convention, she did not receive it for the first time. It's not like Superintendent Baesler hasn't faced opponents in the past. She certainly has. And just to be clear, for those of you who don't maybe know, the superintendent race is a nonpartisan race. So it works a little bit differently than, you know, the so-called partisan races where you have an identified Republican and Democratic candidate. The superintendent race is officially nonpartisan, meaning they are voted on in the June primary, and then essentially the top two vote getters from the June primary move on to the November election. So it's not like anybody's officially the party nominee. That being said, the candidates usually seek what's called a letter of support from the parties, Republican Party, Democratic Party, and sometimes they seek one from both. So anyway, joining us here now, Kirsten Baesler. Kirsten, how are you?
I'm doing well. Me on, Rob.
Tell us a little bit. I mean, you didn't get the NDGOP's endorsement, or I guess letter of support. You've received it in the past. You didn't get it this time. The gentleman who did, I think I look at him and I mean, listen, competition's a good thing. You know, competition among qualified, competent candidates. Maybe they have different ideas, or someone's just saying, "Hey, it's time to move on." That's the process, right? That's democracy. I'm looking at Jim Bartlett in the things that he said on his stage, the things that were said by the people nominating him, the speeches that the people that he brought on stage to give speeches in support of him. It makes me feel like this man is not fit for that office. In fact, in some ways, I'm not sure he understands what that office does. Anyway, I'm editorializing. Tell us a little bit what that convention experience was about.
Sure, and I agree with so much of what you said. As you mentioned, I asked for the letter of support in 2012, 2014, 2016, and in 2020. So, and each of those cycles before 2012, 16, and 20, I had competition. I was not running unopposed. I know that there were several offices at this convention, even this last time, that are unopposed, but that's never been my experience. I had an opponent in 2012, one in 16, a couple in 2020, and I have opponents this year. I don't shy away from that. They've made me better. They've made me sharper. They've made me more convicted and more convinced, and I had to be sharp. I had to know what I was talking about, and I had to have a better plan. And so going into this convention, I realized that things had shifted quite a bit in the Republican Party, particularly the attendees at that Republican convention. So to be quite honest with you, that convention was the biggest decision that had been weighing on my mind since I decided to run again. I was trying to figure out whether I should go or not, because I knew it was going to be tough, and I knew that there was just different sentiment among the convention goers at the Republican Party in recent years. But I decided in the end that I was going to show up. If the letter of support didn't go to me, then it didn't go to me. But I wasn't just going to hand it over to them. I needed to show up. I needed to make my case, and essentially that's what happened. I presented my track record of success. Done a lot of great things with the team and our school districts for our kids in the state. Presented that track record, gave me an opportunity to actually, I think, lay out what the superintendent actually does, can do, and can't do, and presented my ideas for the future, my vision of what I want for our children in this state and K-12 system. My opponent presented his ideas and his vision for the future and what he wanted school to be. And at the end of the day, they liked his ideas better than mine. they voted and he won. So I guess that pretty much sums it up.
Kirsten, I think that you describing the convention process, you're handling it in a very professional way. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you some rapid fire questions about your opponent and how you feel about some things. The first one is, one of the people who nominated Mr. Bartlett over and over and over again referred to public schools as evil. You are currently standing in a public school. Can you tell me how much evil is happening in that building today?
I'm in school almost every week. There is not evil. It was so ironic, the difference of environment. Nights prior to the election to my vote, I was at the Avalon Center in Fargo, North Dakota, where there was an event, a celebration of 29 students from the Camp County area that had received the Presidential Scholar. And they took videos of all these kids, asked them all sorts of questions. Every single one, to the number, every single one of those kids thanked their teachers, thanked their parents, thanked their schools. There was one private school student there, but the rest were public schools. They thanked their teachers, and many of their teachers were there celebrating and supporting them that evening as well. There isn't evil in our schools. My 3 sons were educated in public schools. My 2 granddaughters, soon to be 3 granddaughters, will be educated in public schools. They're not evil. They're wonderful community members that are doing great work helping our students achieve their best.
Rob, I'm going to go one more and then I'll throw it back to you. We've heard a lot about Mr. Bartlett wanting the 10 commandments in the schools. But in addition to that, he has said he wants local school districts to, quote, unhook from state and federal funding. What would schools look like without state or federal funding? And I also assume Mr. Bartlett would support eliminating property taxes. What would schools look like in the state without state or federal dollars?
Well, I don't know how. I would agree that I would imagine that he's not a fan of property taxes either. Look, taxes, but you have no federal funding when you have no state funding. And so let's just be clear, federal funding is about 7 to 11% of the total funding. Almost 80% of public education funding per child comes from the state. If you want to hook those two, you have to have it fall back on the local subdivisions, on the local property owners, the local citizens in that community. And I just don't know that they have. Many of our communities, my hometown of Slasher, does not have that type of base to afford to educate all of the students that live in Slasher school district. And so I don't know what his ideas are. And I will just say this. Everything that he says sounds really good. It sounds like the right thing to say, but there's absolutely no plan forward. There's no way to get that across the finish line. He has even said that it would take some constitutional changes and it would need to take some legislative changes, certainly. There's just no path forward for him to do the things he claims he's going to do.
I mean, I don't even know that some of the things he says sound good on paper. Some of the things he says sounds like he's going to make our schools welcoming only for a certain type of student who has a certain type of religious beliefs. I mean, our North Dakota, like America, is a tapestry of people who have a wide spectrum of beliefs, and it's the responsibility of the public schools to serve all of them. And in some ways, I mean, I think it's good. Like we invite those things in. Like we recognize, yes, we have Christian students. Yes, we have Jewish students. Yes, we have students who are from secular families that don't maybe particularly have a belief system. You know, I don't know. I listen to him and I don't feel like he's going to make our schools welcoming. Anyway, Kirsten, when I was sitting in that room listening to your speech, I was up in the back, on the concourse looking out over the delegates, and I'm listening to your speech. And I'm thinking, this is in any other political cycle, this is a very strong candidate speech. It's data driven. You're giving specific examples of the ways that the policies that you have supported have made a difference. I thought it was very good. And then I also remember thinking at the same time, this is absolutely the wrong speech for this audience, which wants, right, sort of performative, bomb throwing, red hot rhetoric. Like they don't want to hear like this very nuanced, policy-driven approach. It's got to be frustrating to try to earn the votes from people who don't seem to be, their priorities when it comes to candidates, are not what they should be. And I realize, I mean, what I am saying now is apostasy in politics. You're not supposed to say that the voters are wrong, but in that room, and it's not because I think Kirsten Baesler is like entitled to this job at all. I mean, again, you've faced honorable opponents in the past. Brant Dick in the last cycle, I thought was a strong candidate. The voters, went another way, but he was a serious person with serious ideas. I realize this is terrible, but like the voters in that room are wrong. Like their priorities are wrong.
Well, I appreciate that. I think they're wrong too. And if I don't hear from families, and I don't care if they are Christian families or practicing Muslims, or if they're Jewish, but what I hear from families is they actually don't want their schools to be teaching those things. If they do, they'll choose a private parochial school because some families do want that, and there are options there. But what I hear resoundingly, and I hear this resoundingly from even people that were in this room, that schools shouldn't be teaching that. Schools should be making sure, and this is what I hear from families, yes, they want their children to be have high morality and integrity and trustworthiness and honesty and all of those good things and hard, good work ethics. But that's not exclusive to a single religion. But they also want their children to be able to read, to write, to do math, to ask serious science questions, to solve problems with the knowledge that they have. That's what they want. They want their teachers to be teaching in a safe, supportive environment so their teachers can be the teachers to their students and those good role models to the students that our families want. I've not heard in 12 years that families are asking me for more Christianity. And so our approaches, our paths, our platforms are completely different. And I do pride myself on having the conversation about all children. 2012, my campaign speech started with, how are the children? Are the children well? And I asked the question, are all of our children well? And what do we need to do as a state, as a nation, to make sure all of our children are well? I'm asking that same question in 2024. We've made significant gains, but I'm not saying just some of our kids or just the kids we'll even talk about Christianity. I define thou shalt not kill in probably a very different way than many of my Catholic friends do. When I taught that to my children, I talked about killing of spirit and talking poorly about someone. Someone else of the Catholic faith may not define it that same way. That's why I want to teach those things to my children in the way, and my grandchildren in the way that I want to do it. That's not the role of public schools.
Kirsten, one of the sort of hot talking points about public schools right now is parental rights. Your opponent has basically said that he wants parents to have absolute control over everything that happens in their education. As you know, I'm a proud parent of a first grader at Wilmore Elementary School, one of the greatest elementary schools in the state of North Dakota. I struggle when people talk about the lack of parental rights because I can't figure out for the life of me what rights I don't have as a parent. So this is sort of a two-pronged question. How can we better engage parents so it's not a teachers versus parents? Because often I think when we hear about parental rights, it is either or. So it's a one-pronged question. How do we get teachers and parents to work better together so it's not this political fight? Because, I don't know what my rights are that I don't have, and it frustrates me when folks are telling me I need more rights in my kid's life in North Dakota.
Well, Chad, I think you hit exactly on the solution. It's not about parental rights. If we want to talk about rights in a democratic sort of way, a republic sort of way, the right can be exercised by electing a local school board. But really what I think we are talking about, and you and I agree on, is we need to increase family engagement. And I don't want to talk about one-way communication from a school going home saying this is what we need you to do to help your child get better. Family engagement is a critical component. If schools were going to be able to do this job alone, we would have done it by now. All of our children would be well, as the saying goes. We can't do it alone. We need to have family engagement. And that's one of the things that I'm proud of. In 2016, I started the Family Engagement Cabinet, and it's a group of family members, grandpas, aunts, grandpas and grandmas, moms and dads, aunts and uncles. Actually, there's even an individual that doesn't have any children. He and his wife weren't able to have any children of his own, so they think all of that community is their children. They're engaged. And there are very specific steps that can be taken to improve family engagement. I will throw out a couple of schools. Valley City is deeply engaged in this. West Hope has been deeply engaged in this. We've put together a playbook and multiple resources. I brought a gentleman out named Steve Constantino, my former colleague from Virginia, hired him to go around. He did, I think, 15 different trainings in 15 different regions for where local school districts came, their teachers came, their families came. There is a way to do it, and we have to have that communication, because when school is important to our parents, school is important to their children, and their children do better. The data behind that is undeniable. So we can and should do a better job of building a strong bridge, and there's ways to do that. But fighting and screaming and hollering and demanding parental rights, as they say, is not a way to build a relationship. We've got to focus on building relationships.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we need schools that function, and I just, that approach doesn't facilitate that. In that vein, we've seen national reports about absenteeism at the national level really becoming a problem post-pandemic, where the number of cases of chronic absenteeism has really grown. I mean, in some places doubled, tripled. I went to the North Dakota Public Schools dashboard, which, by the way, was a Kirsten Baesler innovation with assistance from the legislature and funding. It is superb, by the way. I mean, if you want to find real data about how your schools are performing or how North Dakota public education is performing in general, it's a great resource. I went and looked on there, and sure enough, North Dakota's got a problem too, or it sure looks to me like we've got a problem based on the graph. So I know that's on your radar. How do we approach this? I mean, how do we address that and get the kids back at school?
Yeah, I think engagement is the key there. So one of the things we measure absenteeism and measure chronic absenteeism because it's required by the U.S. Department of Ed. But one thing that we began measuring in 2016 was student engagement. And you can also go on that dashboard and see how your students are engaging. You will absolutely see there's a definite correlation. If kids are engaged and school is relevant to their life, that's the problem that we're having right now. They stayed home for 3-4 months in the spring of 2020. They learned a lot of online opportunities, even for that first semester of the fall of 2020. And so we got them back in school in 2021. But when they saw that there was another way to learn, students began to ask the question of why does this matter to me? Why am I going if I can learn it online? So that's the job of us. That's on us as adults, is to redefine. We can't just expect that these kids are going to blindly show up, sit in their seats, and listen to us pontificate. We've kind of got to reinvent ourselves and have more engaging, more relevant life lessons. Again, I mentioned, we're out in eastern North Dakota. There are some superb schools in our state right here. We don't have to go out of state very far, or you don't have to go out of state at all to find schools that are actually teaching high school, middle school, and elementary school, solving really real life problems like, the agriculture problems and water quality problems and water containment problems, local problems that these kids are solving. And these are bright kids. They are engaged. They show up. When it's just like us as adults, when you go to work, if you're excited about what you're doing at work, you're going to show up. If you're not excited about it, it doesn't seem relevant to you, a lot harder to pull into your parking lot, right? I had a problem with that.
I wanted to draw a line because I know one thing that I noticed post-pandemic with my kids is that the Minot Public Schools has been really overt in their messaging, saying, if your kid's sick, stay home. And that was a switch. And I understand why. Like, I'm not being critical of it. And then, so part of me was thinking, well, maybe that's why. But we're talking about chronic absenteeism. So what's the difference? I mean, to me, there's a difference in, maybe my kid stays home, a few more days a year because I'm taking this don't go to school if you've got the sniffles or something thing more seriously. To me, that's not chronic absenteeism. What is chronic absenteeism? Like, what is the definition of that?
Missing 15 days or more. Missing 15 days or more of the school year. Yeah. That's a lot. Yep, that's a lot. And I do think that we might be measuring the wrong thing as well. We also have to be measuring, I hate to say this, but butts and seats is not what we should be measuring. We don't even know if they show up if they're learning. We do, and again, the innovative school program, the personalized learning network that is growing in our state I'm so proud of that as well. They're taking a look at things differently. We don't necessarily, chronic absenteeism is something that we have to pay attention to. And we do need our kids to show up because they're going to need to show up in life. They're going to need to show up at their job. But with that being said, are they learning when they're there? Are they engaged when they're there? And if they're learning, do we need to get them out into maybe some pathways, some more work studies, going out in the field, doing a little bit more work? Do we need to make school a little bit more engaging? And that's what we have to make sure that we are supporting our teachers. That's a different way of teaching. And our teachers need the support to kind of retrain and rethink in that way. And I'll tell you again, I have a teachers cabinet, the teachers of the year meet with me once every quarter. Actually, I think we're getting together next week. And these teachers are knocking it out of the park. They didn't go to a trade school and are just doing the same thing every year. These teachers are reinventing themselves every week, every month, every year.
Kirsten, one of the things that during the whole duration of your term or your time in office and probably has accelerated is the issue around recruitment and retention of teachers. And I don't want people to think that this is a North Dakota issue, because we know this is a national issue. It's not just a teacher issue, it's a nurse issue, it's a police officer issue, and all these different kind of things. But the governor's put together a task force. You serve on that task force. What are your thoughts on recruitment and retention? What do you want to come out of this task force? What has your office been doing? I talk to teachers nearly every day, and we know pay and benefits is part of it. Pay and benefits is for everybody, but also some of the stuff we've talked about earlier in terms of, the attacks on public schools and the idea of indoctrinating students or evil going on in public schools. Can you talk a little bit about recruitment and retention of teachers and how you see that going forward during the next 4 years if you're reelected?
Sure, I absolutely can. It's an important issue, and it all ties together. And that's the beautiful thing about education. If we don't have really high quality, committed teachers in our classroom, they're not going to be creating lessons that are engaging, which is going to lead to our kids not being engaged, not learning, and not attending. So it really does start with that person, that adult in the classroom, with teacher recruitment and retention. So a couple things. One, first and foremost, we need to re-elevate the profession of education. That's part of the reason that I expanded the State Teacher of the Year recognition program. Previously, we'd only recognized 4 finalists every year for that award. And we have way too many teachers in the state that deserve recognition. So we started the County Teacher of the Year recognition program and are trying to get County Teachers of the Year recognized from every county. This year, I believe we have 48 of the 53 counties. Someone was nominated and they applied. So that's the first thing. We have to elevate. We have to support them both in our communities and in the state legislature to really, I'm going to say, push back, fight back when you hear things like public schools are evil and school teachers are indoctrinating our children. But, be specific. Have that, whoever's making that claim, tell me where that evil is and who is that indoctrination and what's happening, because I think those are easy things to say. And I don't think they're very easy to prove that that's actually happening in our schools. And if they are, then we'd want to know about it. Of course we would, but let's push back and be specific. The other thing is we have to make sure that the environment, the 2 other things, the working environment, the working conditions for our educators, we need to look at that. I'm a strong believer of a model that I've seen have some great success. Having one teacher, one classroom with 25 students isolated for 6.5, 7 hours a day, not the support and not what this generation of employees want. They are more collaborative. They were collaborative in middle school and high school, and they went to college and they learned to collaborate. And then we put them into a working environment and they're all alone with 25 kids and they're not collaborating with any adults except for 30 minutes once a week in a PLC time. We've got to redesign that. And I'm supporting a couple school districts and some really thoughtful partners that are working to bring more of those models to North Dakota. So that's the second thing. The third thing is we've got to find a way to have those individuals who are already working in schools, who are already know that they love kids and they love teaching and they live in Rugby, North Dakota, or they live in Mott, North Dakota, and they're working in a school and they know they love the community. How do we get them the teaching license and the teaching education? And so right before the pandemic hit, I used some funding that I had to start a Grow Your Own program with Minot State University. And it was getting our paraprofessionals the education while they're still working in their schools and getting their teaching license. We grew that with COVID funding. The legislature supported that effort because we'd had great success. So they provided $3 million. North Dakota was the only education agency in the nation to apply for a U.S. Department of Labor grant for apprenticeship dollars that is dedicated 100% to just supporting teacher apprenticeship in the state. So again, we were the only education agency that applied for this competitive grant. Other states had applied, but it was their commerce, and they were going to use it for nurses and for teachers and for plumbers. We got a $4 million grant award. So to cut to the chase, with the legislature investment and that U.S. Department of Labor, within 3 years, we will have 700 new licensed teachers in our state that were once serving as teachers' aides and paraprofessionals at no cost or low cost teachers, while they're still earning money to support their families. So those are the three things that I think are most important on that issue.
Kirsten, last question. It seems to me like your race is really about something that we've been struggling about with across the country right now, which is in a concerted effort by a faction of Americans to just erode trust in public institutions. And nationally, it's a lot of different things, right? But in your race specifically, it's the K through 12 schools. And we've been talking about it this entire interview where, saying the schools are evil, saying the kids are being indoctrinated there. I don't know. I walk into Minot Public Schools with my children, and I just don't see that happening. I'm not saying there's not things that can be improved and people who could be doing better, but I don't see the ill intent. So is that going to be part of your campaign? I mean, it seems to me like, and I don't think you're going to have much trouble winning in June, if I'm being honest. That's my, I guess, political analysis, if you will. But I mean, is that going to be part of your campaign? Is just, like telling the public you can trust our schools, and that doesn't have to mean that you have to be a cheerleader for our schools, or you have to believe that everything's perfect, or that you can't disagree with the principal or the teacher or the school board or what have you. But it just means like we are doing good. Like our schools are functioning, kids are getting educated, we're doing okay.
Absolutely. I didn't think it was going to have to be as big of a part of my campaign as it needs to be, as I've realized it needs to be. And anybody that has known me, whether it was the last 12 years in office or the 10 years that I served as on the school board, 7 of those years on Mandan School Board president, I'm constantly pushing us to be better. I'm not saying we're perfect and we shouldn't look at things. I'm going to pick up rocks. I'm going to see what's underneath those. I'm going to find out how to get that better. That is my constant state of change, is I need to constantly improve every day. It's the culture of who we are at the department. So yes, I'm going to absolutely recognize how things can get better and work our tail off to make those better. But our schools are doing well. When I took office, we were actually kind of lying to our parents. The bar wasn't set high enough, and we had an honesty gap. We raised the expectations. Our teachers actually decided to raise the expectations for math scores and reading scores because two things: they knew our kids could do it, and they knew that as teachers they could get them there. So we raised the bar, and we're getting there. So I will absolutely say are things perfect? Absolutely not. But the other thing that I've realized that I'm going to have to make a stronger push on is really talking about the Constitution, because the Constitution, I often quoted, my opponent does quote the fact that it needs to teach purity, morality, hard work, honesty, all of those things that our Constitution does say. That's not that the religion doesn't have a corner on that. Everybody can be moral and honest and hardworking. But what the Constitution also goes on to say in that same section that is quoted is that it's free and open to all children, and it's free from sectarian control. And the purpose is for improvement in science and agriculture and industrial work. So that is the role of the public school. It says that in our North Dakota Constitution. And if we're going to quote the Constitution, we cannot just cherry pick the parts that fit our message. We have to look at the totality of what our founders wanted for our public schools in the state.
Kirsten, I said one more question, and then Chad, the prima donna, decided he needed to ask another one. So go.
Well, here's the deal.
Go ahead, Chad.
I've got 16 more I'd like to ask, but I'm going to limit it to one. Kirsten, you mentioned the Constitution. There's a petition being circulated that would end the ability of districts to assess property taxes based on property's value. How do you feel about that measure? How are you going to vote on it? Because I'll be honest, when I talk to our members, they're very, very concerned about this and what it would mean for funding of our public schools.
I am very concerned as well, and everybody needs to have a little bit of skin in the game. I mentioned the average cost to educate a child in North Dakota is $14,000. Of that $14,000, $11,000 comes from the state. and then about 11%, well, actually, from about 7 to 11% comes from federal funding, depending on where your school is located, and the rest comes from property taxes. And so property taxes, it makes up a small portion, but it makes up a lot of that local skin in the game, and it does provide for many of the things that our children need: extra courses, the teacher's salary, good quality teachers. And so I will be voting in opposition of the property tax.
Kirsten, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Kirsten Baesler, North Dakota Superintendent, who's finishing up a third term, running for a fourth term. And Chad, I think it's really, I kind of brought it up. I do think that there's a fundamental, I don't know what you want to call it, a disconnect. I mean, it's like what voters are trying to prioritize right now when it comes to schools just doesn't make, with some voters, I should say, doesn't make a lot of sense, because they're all wrapped around the axle. My kids are being indoctrinated and everything else. And one, if you listen to them closely, it's not that they have a problem with indoctrination. They just want indoctrination that fits in with their views. And I don't think indoctrination is happening in the schools too. I think what they're defining as indoctrination is really just sort of the cost of admission to a free society like we live in here in America. Like, your kids are going to be exposed to ideas that are different from your own. They're going to be exposed to belief systems and political arguments and scientific theories and everything else that you may not agree with, and you're just going to have to deal with it. That's not indoctrination. That's being an American.
Rob, I'd go a step further. I think a lot of these people who claim this stuff is going on in public schools haven't stepped foot in a public school in a long, long time.
No, what they've done is they've listened to a talk radio host, or they've watched a cable news segment, and they heard about some real horror story from some school district in Louisiana or something, and then they think, well, this could be happening in your school district, and then they assume that it is.
Or they take a bit of information. It's sort of like the conversation you overheard about Burgum and the police officer and all that. They take just a bit of information about something that happened in a school somewhere, and they just broadly, I mean, my brother...
Just by the way, what Chad was referencing with Burgum and the police officer, just to be very clear about that, it was not true. I had written a column where I had overheard someone. I was at the mall with my daughter, and I was sitting waiting for her to finish shopping, and I overheard a conversation that a gentleman was having on a cell phone not that far from me, and he was telling somebody that Doug Burgum didn't run for president because his son had killed a police officer, and he had to withdraw. Which obviously is not true at all, but that's what Chad was referencing. I didn't want there to be any confusion.
These sort of conspiracy theories, I mean, there's real world consequences to them. My brother's an administrator in Bismarck. He's a principal. And he said things where, like, something has been said on talk radio that was completely untrue, claiming something took place at the school where he's the principal. And he ends up spending days trying to unwind from, people calling and saying, why did you let this happen? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. That stuff isn't happening here. So that takes away professional educators from spending time with students because of these sort of crazy conspiracy theories. But really quickly, going back to Kirsten, I don't agree with Kirsten on everything. And she and I talked to her quite a bit and we disagree. But I mean, by and large, we agree on the future of public education. She knows her stuff. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about the questions we're asking her, and this is what we've done. This is what we're going to do. This is what I believe, whatever. None of her opponents could have the conversation we just had with Kirsten Baesler.
And she does have three opponents. Jim Bartlett was the one. He won the endorsement of the, I know it's not called, it's the letter, but I mean, it's an endorsement. I mean, they endorsed him. They said, this is our guy. He's the one who won, but she's also facing a former state senator, Jason Heitkamp, and another Darko. I don't even know who this person is.
No, like Darko Dragovic or something. He sounds like a bad guy on a movie. That's what his name is.
Like maybe he's a vampire or something. I don't know. I don't know who this person is.
He's an employee at United Tribes and maybe worked at University of Mary at some point in education as well.
I mean, good for him. It's an open process. We'll hear about his ideas too, I guess, if he's gonna campaign. And again, the problem is not Kirsten Baesler facing competition. I think she's faced some pretty sharp challenge. Brant Dick again comes to mind last time. I like the light of Woody.
Max Laird. I mean, it's been like real people.
Yeah. And they didn't win. The voters chose Kirsten, and and that's just normal. That's democracy. That's, they had a robust debate and she lost. I'm really struggling with the number of voters, the number of candidates who are coming to these races, just we're not arguing about the same reality. Like, they have this notion about things that are happening in our schools that just simply aren't happening.
Well, and to her credit, she's not going out there and saying public schools are perfect and every person that works in a public school is perfect. But there's a difference between, having some things that aren't going well and describing public schools as evil, right? I mean, they're very different things. And I think she's got a pretty good grasp. And again, she's been in this job for 12 years. If you're in a job for 12 years, you're going to irritate some people, right? You're going to make some decisions that people don't like. And so,
you're going to make some mistakes.
Right. And I question why she went to the Republican convention. And maybe, it's just like, I'm going to see this thing through. But, I mean, if you look at the votes against Joe Chang and other folks at past conventions, this was the natural progression of her at Republican conventions as Republican activists have become more anti-public schools.
Yeah, or at least the ones participating in the convention process. That was not, again, what I was saying about sitting up, kind of in the rafters there and looking over the crowd as she was speaking and thinking, well, this is a very solid speech that 2/3 of the people here don't care about because they want somebody shaking their fist and thundering about, and not that I shouldn't say that. Bartlett's a very soft-spoken guy, actually, but, saying, pretty ugly things about our schools and that. And you have to wonder if somebody like that gets elected, given some of the things he said about public educators and whatnot, what's his relationship with those people going to be?
Well, and people are going to flood out of the system, right? People aren't going to stay in the system where the chief educator in the state is basically saying public schools are bad, public schools are evil. And think about a bad public school system or having a leader of our public school system saying bad things about what does that mean for economic development? What does that mean for people coming to our state if you've got the chief school officer saying our public schools are evil, our public schools are indoctrinating kids? It doesn't bode well for the state's economy moving forward.
One point that you made, and this really bothers me too, is there doesn't seem to be any consequences for people who whether they're in the on talk radio or whatever, or people who are operating in the political sphere. Like, there's no consequences when they say things that just turn out to not be true. It's like they just move on to the next thing. Somebody wrote a column and the column was in the context of, they were writing about Donald Trump, but I think you can apply it outside of that. But it was called like the stopped clock theory. And it was, every once in a while, like Trump and mega world, like they have a point about something, right? Like some of the exaggerations about the Steele dossier or some of that, where there really was an overreach, or there really was, and they get all the credit in the world when they're right about that. But there's no accountability, like on the 99% of other things that they're just not telling the truth about.
Right.
And it's like, we just look, so it's like every once in a while, a talk radio host will have like a point, right? Like there's a legitimate thing, but there's no accountability for all the other things they got their skirts over their heads about that are just made up. That were just completely made up. Like they just move on from it. And that really bothers me. And it's why I like working in a medium where like all my articles are online. Like they don't just disappear into the atmosphere. If I'm wrong about something, you can go back and look it up and say, boy, remember when you said this? I have to own it. Still sitting there under my byline. So that really bothers me. And I wish the public was interested. And it seems like for a lot of members of the public, as long as the person is sort of, titillating their particular set of biases, they're okay with it.
Yeah. As long as it's something that, is on my side of the aisle, it's my side of the ideological spectrum, I'll let it slide. But there's real damage, right? I mean, if you're a talk show host, you're just making stuff up that's happening at schools, and then those educators have to deal with that stuff, or the school boards, who have real issues to deal with, have to deal with, I'm all for public comment, but when it's public comment not based on fact, it's a waste of time, and people have real things to do.
Fargo's been having a debate about how much public comment to allow at meetings, and I think they need to be careful. They need to allow public comment, but on the other hand, I don't think they're obliged to hold just wide open public comment. Not in the age where everybody's got Facebook or whatever. If somebody wants to expound, let them do a Facebook live stream. Let them start a podcast or a blog or something. We don't have to allow this at the I don't think there's anything wrong with saying we're going to have public comment, but it's going to be restricted to things that are on the agenda.
Right.
Or if they want to talk, or if they want to talk about something that's not on the agenda, it's got to have, and the idea that that's silencing anybody in an environment where anybody with a Twitter account or X account, I guess I should say, could potentially reach millions of people is absurd.
But the frustration I have when I look at the Bismarck, Burleigh County local government meetings, it's the same 3 or 4 people that show up at every meeting and just expound on whatever their sort of conspiracy theory of the moment is.
And that's a tale as old as time. I mean, remember that old show Parks and Recreation, right? And they would make jokes about the people coming up and just the meeting just going completely off the rails because the public.
There's too many squirrels in my backyard,
and it's that's not what we're talking about, right? I mean, that's just kind of part and parcel with local government,
right?
And and I don't even necessarily want to do away with all of that, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying no, we're not going to give you, if you're just going to say things that are untrue, we're not going to give you. But now, of course, the other side of that is people sometimes think a thing is untrue just because they don't like hearing it.
Right. And then it becomes true, and then you got a real problem.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's I get accused oh, you're lying. Well, I'm not. Right. I'm making a factual argument here. You just don't want to hear it.
Yeah. Anyway. So, Rob, I listened to you and Ben, your interview with Alex Balazs. Is it
Balazs?
And I thought it was a really interesting interview, but I got to be honest, where'd this guy come from? Right? I mean, I was listening to that interview, and it's nobody knows anything about this. And I was thinking about, I don't know if you read the story about the Republican Senate candidate in Montana, who claimed that he got injured in combat, but turns out he accidentally shot himself.
Yeah.
And years later in a park or something. I always think it's interesting when these candidates come out of nowhere and they've got this sort of perfect bio, and he seems short on specific, and I'm not accusing him of anything, obviously. It's just strange that somebody literally comes out of nowhere and all of a sudden is a congressional candidate and has a pretty good bio, but not a lot of people know specifics.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be on him to substantiate this stuff. And I have put in requests to his campaign for documentation. I mean, he's leaning very heavily on his military service. I've asked for documentation of that. And his campaign expressed, I think Alex during the interview expressed surprise afterwards in a phone call with his campaign. His campaign, expressed, I've never heard of somebody being asked for this kind of stuff. And I was kind of really? Because
how about just pictures?
Yeah, I mean, do you have pictures? I mean, my dad's got pictures from Vietnam.
Yeah, I could provide you pictures of my dad when he was in Vietnam too.
I'm looking at one of them and getting a silver star. It's on my wall right now. So I don't. I mean, again, it's up to him to say he's made these claims. It's up to him to substantiate them, and that was one of the arguments I made. Is Rick Becker has a track record in the legislature. We've all known Rick Becker for a long time. Make of him what you will, but he's got a voting record we can go back and look at. Julie Fedorchak has has a long track record in government, not a voting record like in the legislature, but we can go back to Public Service Commission decisions and things like that and look at the things she's done. We know Julie Fedorchak. She's a known quantity, which doesn't mean if she makes claims that we shouldn't check them out, but there's a degree of we know this person. So it's going to be on him to do that. I hope he comes with it. And the other thing is the money. I mean, so yesterday he filed his quarterly report with the FEC, and I wrote about it, and he loaned his campaign, I think it was just over $105,000, which again is not unusual. Rick Becker, right. I'm sure when we get Rick Becker's report, a substantial amount of his is probably going to be loans from himself. Tom Campbell would loan money to his own campaign. Doug Burgum has spent $15 million trying to get his own money, trying to get elected president. So, that's not unusual. But again, when it's, I mean, we know where Doug Burgum's money came from, right? We know where Rick Becker's money came. He's a plastic surgeon and has some other businesses. He's a successful guy.
Tom Campbell got his money from selling his land to Bill Gates.
They're also a banking family. They also have a large agricultural, these are successful people, and it's verifiable. Like, we don't know a lot about Alex Balazs, and I think that's the question mark he needs to answer. It could be he's exactly who he says he is, right. And in which case, great.
But I'm looking at the calendar. He's got 2 months.
Well, really early voting starts the end of this month. So,
yeah,
I mean, you've got to make the case. And it's on him to do that. But I did think that was really interesting.
Rob, have you talked to anybody like from the Can-Do area, like that knows him?
Not really. I shouldn't say that. I've talked to people who have seen him start to show up to like local Republican meetings and stuff. But when I first interviewed him, he said that he moved back to North Dakota in 2015 to the family farm, and they bought it from the family and decided that's where they wanted to live there after his wife was also they both were federal employees, according to him. He says he served 20 years in the military, that he served in the Army, Air Force, and the Navy. And then after that went into work as a federal employee in the Foreign Service, and has said things about serving, in a diplomatic capacity, serving alongside ambassadors.
So there might be some stuff he can't talk about. I mean, in terms of...
I mean, it could be, but there's got to be some. because he's talking about it, like he's telling us about it. Like if he should be able to substantiate those things. So, I do. That is a fundamental if you're going to be an unknown candidate and come out of nowhere, then that's one of the things that comes with that is we're going to shine a big old spotlight on your resume and see what's there.
Right. Yeah. And it's got to be the expectations. And even it makes you, when you ask his consultants, can you provide this stuff? And they say, I've never heard of anybody asking for this before. Like, what? Like, even if they hadn't,
I don't know. I mean, I feel like we have a pretty long history of political candidates who get caught embellishing their resumes, whether military or not. People who we just had a member of Congress who was expelled, George Santos, for making up
everything on his resume.
I mean, he made up. Is his mom alive or dead? I'm still not sure I know. So to say in that environment that you've never, I kind of chuckled at that a little bit. Like, I'm sorry, you're running, a longtime reporter friend of mine always tells me, like, he would tell people, like, once you start running for elected office, like, we reporters, we care where your car's parked, right? I mean, that's how it should be. Like, you want the limelight, well, here it is.
Yeah, so I think that congressional race is still interesting. And then, the last time we spoke was on Monday.
Yeah.
And that's when we're still talking about Cara Munn, in or out on the thing.
I have been getting it right, too, by the way, now, Cara. Yeah, I've got it drilled.
I don't know. I think I told you that my wife listened to our podcast on Monday, and she texted me, it's Cara and you are both idiots, is what she told me. And it's fair. I mean, it's tough, but fair. You got to appreciate that honesty.
There we go.
But there's no TV ads running yet. There's nothing in this congressional race. Cara Munn likely has close to the highest name ID, probably of the 5 candidates.
Her and Rick Becker probably neck and neck.
Yeah, and and I think we're going to have Cara on next week to talk about this. But I'm interested in sort of running as an independent, now running as a Republican. How do you sort of balance things that you said during the last election with this election? I think it's going to be tough. I think it's really interesting. I think it's
really interesting, and anything can happen. I mean, you're in an environment where theoretically you could win with 20% plus one of the vote, right?
Right.
So I think Cara's challenge is, she's always, I've been starting to see it, like emails from people and comments on social media and stuff. Like, why is she always getting into these races so late? Like, why is it always at the last minute? Why? I mean, last time it was like she was the de facto candidate for Democrats. Now she's running as a Republican. I realized last time she maintained that she was a Republican, but I think it's just going to be tough for her. And she's running as a pro-choice candidate in a Republican primary, which even given the extent to which abortion has become something of a millstone around the neck of Republicans, which, by the way, I wrote about that this week, where I think democracy has been good for the abortion. I mean, I realize we're going through a lot of stuff with it right now, but I'm kind of glad. Like, I feel like a reckoning has come. I feel like we're finally having to reckon with this. This is real policy that affects real people. The decisions we've been making in these legislatures matter. And we're going to, and I mean, you're seeing, you have the presumed presidential candidate of the Republican Party opposing extreme abortion bans. Like, as much as I dislike Donald Trump, and also opposing a federal abortion ban.
He opposes it now. I mean, 2 weeks ago he supported it. 2 weeks from now he might have,
Although you go back, it's Donald Trump, so yes, he's only.
Yeah, and so I don't know that.
But look at in Arizona, where the court said a 19th century near total ban on abortion could be enforced, and you have Republicans trying to overturn that. Although also Republicans on the other side, but like Kari Lake, who's a Trump.
I think it's Kari Lake. I mean, come on, man.
I think Kari Lake. Oh my God.
I think it's Kari Lake.
I
saw her commercial.
This is a product of the fact that I don't like listening to things. I don't watch a lot of it. I read everything, and so every once in a while I get caught up on pronunciations.
Maybe it's not Kari. I'll wait for Aaron.
Stop.
I'll wait for Aaron to text me and tell me.
Our Aaron Oban, our show ombudswoman.
Yes. Anyway, no, but I think your point about this is good. It's a good conversation for us to have at the state level, until a group of Republicans who wants to now go back and have a national ban. We've gone from this place of we need to overturn Roe because the states have to make a decision.
I agree with that.
And now there's a group of Republicans who are like, except for now we want to take away states' rights.
I think we were talking about this off air a little bit. I do think Julie Fedorchak made a mistake by supporting a national ban. If you go back to her interview with us back when she first got into this race, what'd you say, about 6 weeks ago is when it was?
I don't even know if it's that long ago, but I mean, that's a pretty big flaw.
But she was against it. Now she's for it. And I think it's a mistake. And I think it's a mistake from a conservative perspective. Like we have been saying for so long, it's a state's issue. And I think that's the issue. I think that's right on the law, right? I know you probably disagree with this, but I think Roe was improperly decided. I'm glad the court turned it over because I believe it is a state's issue. And I think the state should be allowed to decide it how they will. And it frustrates me. I mean, I think Donald Trump, this is how much I care about. I despise Donald Trump, but he is right to oppose a federal abortion ban.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think he's doing it out of any sort of principle. And you're right, that may change at any time. But
talking about Julie again, I think we're having her on next week as well.
Yeah.
Her supporting a national abortion ban, which is more extreme than Donald Trump, Doug Burgum, Kelly Armstrong. You go down. Alex Balaz last week said he was against it. I don't know where Becker is on it, but that's a really, really, really extreme position right now, even in the Republican Party, for her to take, and to go from states' rights to a national abortion ban in a matter of days or weeks or a month is. I will
take issue with you calling it. I'm not sure extreme is the right. I do, and I think I'm trying to get out of the habit of calling things I disagree with extreme. I think it is certainly more draconian, and she's certainly out of step with a lot of other Republicans.
So you think draconian is a softer term than extreme?
I guess maybe. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a misstep by Fedorchak. I really do. And we'll ask her about it, and I guess she can explain.
I look forward to hearing her explanation of the change in her position.
I don't know why she changed, and I really don't see, because again, I think where Americans are coalescing around, I think eventually as all this unwinds, and it's going to probably take years, I think we're probably going to coalesce around a ban after about 15 weeks. I think in most places in the country, that's where it's going to be, and that's where most Americans are.
So, and that's fine in a black and white world. But I have a friend, a couple who were pregnant, tried to get pregnant. Something happened where the baby was not going to be able to live outside of the womb. Why should the federal government determine if this woman can terminate her pregnancy?
I don't think the federal government should. I mean, you mean the state government?
Well, yeah, under the Fedorchak model of the national abortion ban. So the determination is Congress should make the decision over this woman, her husband, her God, her doctor, all these different things. The federal government should make that decision. This woman now at least has the option to go to Minnesota to get something done. Under a national abortion ban, she would have to bring the baby to full term, go through the pain. The child would have to go through pain of being born. Why should a government make that decision? And I'm getting bigger picture than just the abortion. I mean, we're getting into the abortion thing, but I don't think a congressman from California should determine if somebody in Bismarck, North Dakota, can get a medical procedure.
I think I have a hard time putting anything beyond the scope of the democratic process, and that was my problem with Roe. It read into the U.S. Constitution a right to do something that was never intended by any of the people who wrote that document, and it kind of took it up out of the democratic process, even where we settle all sorts of everything. We have settled everything from sterilization laws. How do we deal with people who have mental issues or whatever? We deal with these just searingly difficult issues all the time. Your example, maybe we need to craft law, but we can have those debates in state legislatures, and some of the policy is going to be good and some of it's going to be bad, but I'd rather have the debate than to have it locked out entirely, which is what the courts did. Anyway, we got to go. We got to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah, next week, Kara Munn's going to be on. Julie Fedorchak's going to be on. We're going to keep rolling in this busy election cycle. Thank you so much for listening. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcast, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcast and explore them all today.